In this video, I'm going to talk a bit about making the game and what you'll need and getting the game ready for setup and the initial setup as well. So in this example here, I've made my board. You can either print it out on a larger piece of paper, what we here in the UK would call A3. That's about roughly double the size of a piece of letter, or A4, depending on where you're from. Or you can just print it out on letter or A4 and stick it together. It's entirely up to you. So it's not a huge footprint board, so you don't need too many printouts to physically make the board. And I stick the board down to like a thick cardstock, mostly because I've been playtesting the game extensively. It's had a bit of wear and tear. The counters themselves, there's one sheet of counters to print out and to make, and I've got some examples here. So here we've got our airborne units. We've got some of the bravery counters here that you'll need, and some of the German counters here. And there are a small number of gameplay orientated counters as well. There's not a huge number of counters to make for the game, so certainly no more than a sheet. I'm still sort of finalizing the exact counter numbers, but there's only 5, for example, British airborne counters to make there. For the Germans, I've been playing somewhere between a number of 10 and 15 counters for the Germans, and this is sort of, I don't know, a dozen or so sort of gameplay orientated counters, so not too many. I do have a separate video on how I make my counters, so I'll put the link to that and you can watch that. That's how I make my counters for all my print and play games that I design. So once you've got everything set up on your board, you've made all your counters, then we'll have a look at how you organize the initial setup. So once you've made your counters, the very first thing you're going to be doing is organizing your attributes or the stats for each of your 5 airborne counters. And there's a handy player aid for you to write everything down that you need. So each of our 5 counters, they all have the same attribute classifications: attack, defense and morale. And we see here counter A, counter B, B, so forth and so forth. Each of these numbers varies from 1 to 3, 3 being better than 1, but each of the numbers has to be different. So for example, I can give squad A an attack of 3, a defense of 2 and a morale of 1. So each number is up to 3, and no 2 numbers are the same. The attribute values you give per squad can be identical. So if I want to, I can give squad number B the same values, 3, 2, 1. And if I really want to, I can give them all that value, or any other combination. So I can give squad C, for example, 1 attack, 2 defense, 3 morale. I can give squad D, for example, 2 attack, 3 defense and 1 morale. Doesn't matter, the organization doesn't matter. Each counter can have the same values as each other if they want, but the restriction is the numbers have to be different. What I can't do is give squad E attack 3, defense 3 and morale 1. It has to be, each number has to be different. That's the key mechanic. And as you learn the game, and I'll show this in the videos, you'll understand what each of these values do. What I would recommend, certainly to start with, is a good combination of a variety of different counters with different attributes, and you'll be able to use those in the game, in the gameplay, to your best advantage. And knowing which unit to use when and so forth is extremely useful and part of the depth of the game. So let's just finish this one here. Let's give this one an attack 2, a morale 3 and a defense of 1. So I've got all my values done. If you want to, you can also name your counters. So in the history of this actual raid, each of the squads did have a name, and you can name them here on the sheet if you want to. what I'll do in the rulebook, I'll give the historical names, and you can use those, or you can have your own. It's entirely up to you. It adds a little bit of flavour to the game. Now, also, if you want, again in the game, if it's easier for you to place a counter underneath the counter with those attributes on, I'll provide some blank counters in the game, and you can write those values on, so you're not having to refer to the play rate. I like referring to the play rate. I have it next to me, so I also write notes all over it as well. But it's entirely up to you. So the game has that flexibility, and I like to try and think about the user experience, what the user could possibly want to make your game playing experience the best it can be. So I'll provide some blank counters, and you can put the values on the counters if you prefer. So now we've made our counters, we've worked out the attributes to each of the counters, and now we can place the counters on the board for the initial setup. And there are a couple of things, there's only a couple of things you need to do. First thing you need to do is place a German unit, a German counter, in the following zones: rectangle 1, rectangle 2, villa, beach defences, and then place another counter on villa and another counter on beach defences, and place re-roll counters under each of those counters there, just like that, but for each of those. And there they are the starting places of the German infantry and personnel that you will encounter as a minimum as you progress through the game to the beach exit. Then you can place your airborne units in two locations. I'm just going to move the map down a little bit, it's a little bit off camera. The first location is the forming up zone here, and the second location is the Bruneval coastal defence there. So, and the number in which you do so and the choices that you make are entirely up to you. So, for example, I shall put squad A, B, C, D, all in forming up, and I will place squad E in the coastal defence zone there. If I wanted to, if I really wanted to, I could have one counter here and 4 counters over there. That is not a strategy I would recommend, by the way, but it demonstrates the flexibility you have and the choices you have to make as the player. I actually would recommend this setup, certainly for your first few games, to learn the game, and it more represents the actual history of the particular raid. So I put most of my squads here in the forming up, and most of them in the coastal defence there. You will also need a couple of D6. I have some thematic British Airborne dice there. Any dice will do. They don't have to be the same colour. It's entirely up to you. I recommend actually 2 dice. I recommend 2 dice, but if you've got a third dice, that will be incredibly useful. So between you can play the game perfectly fine with 1 dice, by the way, but I'd recommend, for a little bit of ease of comfort, 2 or 3 dice and a pen and the printout of the rulebook, player aids, etc. If you want, you obviously can use them on your laptop or computer or tablet or phone, whatever device of your choosing. And that is all you need to do to set the game up. How long it takes to set to as you can see, it takes minutes to set the game up. It's a small footprint. In terms of how long does it take to make the game, I think the last mock-up I made, I sort of sat there and made the counters and put the map up in sort of about an hour, something like that. And of course, once it's done, you never have to do it again. And that's it. So I hope that gives you a good understanding of the requirements for the setup, the most important pieces of information about choosing your attributes for your squads, and where to put the different starting formations, starting counters on the board.